My name is John Alden Kingsley. My father was Clifford Alden Kingsley, lived in South Dakota. He was something of an athlete there, played baseball for the high school team. As a matter of fact, he was the Iowa State High School Boys 1 mile run champion, in which he ran in the same Drake relays, probably not against, but with a world champion by the name of Paavo Nurmi from Finland. And subsequently, upon graduation, he joined the Navy and saw much of the after going to school, naval school for radio, I believe, and for machinist school. He became a machinist in the Navy and served on the USS California in the Pacific. And these were the years, the early 1920s, when he was in the Navy, maybe from time he was 18 to the year 1925 or 26 or something like that. My mother is Daisy Bell McDonald, and she was born near or in Sydney, Nova Scotia in Canada. My mother was short in stature and quiet. She took took care of me very well, protective, and tried her best to educate me and all. She was an adequate cook, not great, but adequate. At first, they lived in an auto court on San Fernando Road in Glendale. It was a group of individual cabins centered around a driveway and parking area, and that's where they lived. And I vaguely recall that playing in the dust and the dirt of the driveway and so forth. And I'm told that once a car ran over me, obviously didn't do any damage, but that's what I was told. One of the things that I vaguely recall him telling us is that the story about the motorcycle. There was a time when he was in the Navy. He was stationed here in Long Beach, and he had acquired a motorcycle, and I don't know how long he had it, but apparently there was a time when he was in traffic and at a stop somewhere or something like that, and the motorcycle fell over and carried him with him, and he got so mad that he down in Long Beach they had a pier, and he apparently got so mad that he just drove the motorcycle off the end of the pier, jumped wide and let it fly, and that's one of the Navy stories I remember. My mother was a housewife. There was a time I recall where she worked in a cookie factory. Before they were married, she worked in. She had a job in Curry's ice cream parlor. It was a chain of ice cream parlors around Southern California, and she apparently had a job. I don't know how long she was there. as a secretary or something like that for the company. But during their married life, she was pretty much a homemaker. But I do remember that there was a time when she worked at a cookie factory, I suppose, packaging cookies or whatever they did. Yeah, but that I don't think was very long. But the two of them together never seemed to be, I guess they had a kind of a mutual understanding that they never displayed real emotions, real happiness or joy, or that sort of life. I graduated from high school in 1950. In that summer of 1950, I turned, in August, I turned 18. I started going to college, Glendale College, now called a community college, then it used to be called junior college. And I went to college at Glendale, and I started out as a major in art, but because of the influence of a very personable friend, the art teacher there, Ms. Helen Rampell, I switched I started out there in architecture, and I did very well in architecture, but because of Helen Rampell, the art teacher who I became friends with and I was influenced by, I guess you might say, I switched my major to art.
Mrs. Rampell was the design instructor at Glendale College, and she was good. She opened up doors for us and helped us understand the basics of design, much more so than what I got in high school. I had art classes in high school. But she was good, and John and I both liked her, and we were lifelong friends.
I was called to go into the military service. At that time, I traveled with hundreds of other fellows my age up to Fort Ord to begin 8 weeks of infantry training. After 8 weeks, I was transferred, and I never understood why or how the Army selects people, but I was transferred to the Medical Corps and was to go to San Antonio, Texas, to Brooke Army Medical Center, which was located in Fort Sam Houston, right on the outskirts of San Antonio, Texas. I was there at Fort Sam Houston until 1956. And then at that time, after my 2 years of service, I was discharged from the Army as a specialist, second class, which I believe is comparable to what used to be called a corporal. So there was a time I worked full time and went to night school, but there was a time when I was, seems like I went to school in the morning, worked and then came back and worked all afternoon, and then went back to school at night. So I was schooling full-time and working part-time, as I remember. It was kind of confusing. This went on for a couple of years. And then there became a point where it got to be, the 2 jobs got to be too much for me, and I began to have chest pains, and that concerned me, so I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, you have to choose one or the other. And my rationale was that I was getting more experience and learning, maybe not learning more, but getting more experience doing the work. So I eventually dropped out of the night school and went full-time and concentrated on work.
Well, we're old pals from junior college, Glendale JC. We both were, I thought he was an art major. I think someone said he was an architecture major at first, but I don't remember that. But anyway, we had art classes together, and Mrs. Rempel and a couple of other professors up there. And then we just sort of hung around together sometimes.
It was about 1962. And I was freelancing. I was working at Lennon and Newell. And my friend Ken Tremaine, who I had met in college, and who we had stayed in touch, he was an art history major, and he went to LA City College. And he was inducted into the Army about the same time I was, shortly after I was. And he spent his Army years in Korea as a clerk typist, I believe, on the demarcation line between North Korea and South Korea. And periodically he would have a R&R, and took his R&R in Japan. And then when it came time to get out of the service, he elected to stay in Japan, and he had stayed there for several years, as a matter of fact, a few years anyway. And in 1962, he came back to the States to continue his education, going to UCLA. And he decided, he contacted me to see if I convinced me to move out of our home and share a space in an apartment, which we did up in Beverly Glen Canyon.
Well, it was easy because John's easygoing, and we, discussed everything we wanted to do, what color. We painted and cleaned up the place and improved it a little bit. I was working on a little garden on the outside of the house, and our landlady Mercedes just was tickled pink with us. So it was an easy adjustment, and I had lived alone in Japan for a while. John, that's probably his first breakaway from the family, so it was a bigger deal for him than it was for me. But his mom and dad were both alive, and so it wasn't so bad for them, and we just did it and had a good time. When I came back from Japan, I was going to UCLA, and I wanted to live near the campus. And John was working in the Valley at the time, and so I convinced him that we should look for a house or an apartment or something to rent, to share expenses. So that's what we did, and we discovered this duplex in Beverly Glen Canyon, and we lived there together until I went back to Japan the second time.
During the time he had been in Japan, he had become engaged to a young woman there, and coming back to the States, I guess her romance had kind of cooled off, and so at mid-semester Ken decided to take a quick trip back to Japan and rekindle this romance. And so he did, and the problem was he never came back.
We rented from a lady named Merce, who was quite a character, had a pretty daughter that we are still friends with. Merce was just goofy, and we went to a bar one night and talked loudly as if we were a menage a trois. That was fun, but she went right along with it. She just was a character. I miss her.
And so I was stuck with the apartment, the full payment of the apartment, and we had acquired a little dog, and it was mainly his dog, but there I was stuck with the dog and the apartment. And so I stayed there. I continued to stay there for a few years.
Well, the first time I went to Japan was when I took my Army discharge there. I did not come back home. And so I stayed there for several years, and then when I had a desire to go back to school and I wanted to go to UCLA, and I was going to go get a master's degree. I never actually finished that, but I was doing that when I went back to Japan the second time. And left John in the lurch, you might say. He and I were roommates. We had this dog that John's not a dog person, and he got stuck with the dog. I think his dad finally took it over. And we also, he had to pay all the rent at that point because I didn't come back for several years. And then I met another lady, and we got married, and then came back.
I was 22, and a month later I met Dad in 65.
Yes, I would have been 34, and born in 32, and we married in 66. We met in 65, so I would have been 33. Many people assume when we're together, they assume that I was a serviceman that met her in the Philippines. She had a suitor in the Philippines that she wanted to get away from. Her father gave her as a graduation gift a trip to the United States, and which she did. She came first to San Francisco for a few weeks. Her goal was to go to New York City, but she lived in San Francisco for a few weeks, and then she came down to Los Angeles.
I was on my way to New York. My plane ticket was all the way to New York. And we dated for a week with his landlady, who happens to be a family friend.
And when and I came down and stayed with Louisa, she met Alice. And Alice said, you should meet, there's a bachelor staying at our house, living in our quarters downstairs. You ought to meet while you're here. And so that's what happened. It was Thanksgiving time, and they invited and I up to their house for Thanksgiving dinner, and me for Thanksgiving dinner. We met, and this fellow Larry was kind of pushy, and he said, you ought to, you have spare time. Why don't you drive her around in Southern California for the next week before she goes to New York? And Alice was to be our chaperone. And so that's what we did. I had my Mustang car, and we traveled around. We went to SeaWorld and Hollywood Boulevard, and saw the various touristy sites that there were to be seen. I kept up a writing correspondence with her. We wrote back and forth and telephoned now and then. And apparently I wrote often, very often, in fact almost every day.
And every day I go into work and I get a card from John. And I come home to the dorm at night and there's letters from him. And that was for good many months.
And after a few months, I proposed on the telephone. I've always thought of it as having a few too many drinks one night and become emboldened to suddenly just proposed.
He proposed over the telephone.
I was always amused by her answer right there on the telephone was,
Sure, why not? Was my answer.
sure, why not?
And from then on he said, boy, I'll give you 2 weeks. Think it over and, and I'll call you back.
And that kind of took me back, and I said, well, I better give you a little time to think it over because it's a big decision to make. At any rate, that's what happened, and then the next question was, where do we get married and when and so forth.
And my youngest brother, who is 3 years older than me, said, oh no, he was so adamant that I get married in the Philippines. So John said, well, you know what? I don't have that many relatives here. I'm the only son, and my dad was the only son, and my mother. So yeah, let's just go over there so they'll meet.
She was only here in the country a few months, and already somebody had proposed to her, and the parents were understandably skeptical. And they insisted that if she was going to get married, it would be in the Philippines, because after all, they hadn't met me, and they wanted to look me over.
I am the first child of Mom and Dad, John and Connie. Apparently, Dad waited in the waiting room, and Mom had a very long labor period. I think nearly 30 hours or something crazy like that. Well, I remember every summer, Mom and Dad would make arrangements to take a vacation with us, and we oftentimes took road trips and rented a camper. We went to the Grand Canyon, and I remember we checked out the Grand Canyon. It's monumentous and huge and everything. And Mom and Dad wanted us to go on a night walk. And so we went on this night walk. And I don't necessarily remember us complaining about it, but we went on this walk and part of the walk, the guide said, turn off all your flashlights. I'll be guiding you. You just follow my voice. You just follow me. And I'll use a flashlight to, point out things that you wouldn't necessarily see during the day. So it was really a night walk. He pointed out positions in the sky, or what do you call them, constellations and so forth. Anyway, the next day I remember that we went out, we followed the same path, and we realized that he had taken us out on a precipice, like on just a narrow piece of mountain. And like if we had stepped 3 feet outside of the line that he had us follow, we probably would have slipped off, off the mountain. Dad is an artist at heart, somewhat of a perfectionist. He's a handy man in terms of woodworking and so forth. I don't think he's very handy with like plumbing or electrical work, but he is handy with just general things at home. He laid down tile at home. He renovated the bathroom on his own. He did a lot of the painting. So that's what I remember. If I had his book that we did for his 70th anniversary or 70th birthday, I could flip to it. He's a photographer. He's got an eye for photography, for picture taking. He loves doing that, and now as he's gotten older, thankfully he likes doing the scrapbooking thing, where he's capturing all his photos. Dad is very reserved and quiet. I don't know what else to say, but I do know that he showers our kids with hugs and kisses when they see them.
I remember as kids, we would always try and be the first one to see Dad. For some reason, we didn't do this game with Mom when she was coming home from work, but when Dad was coming home, we always wanted to be the first one to see him. Driving up the street, coming in the front door, it was always a race. First to see Dad, first to see Dad. But we didn't, I think it was fine during the day. I mean, I don't think we were lacking anything because Mom and Dad both worked, because we had Grandma and Lola at home all the time. Carrying out discipline, Mom did most of the day-to-day discipline. But Dad was, like, if you had to deal with Dad, you were in big trouble. It was scary. So I think probably Dad would be, in my mind, he was the one that I feared more. And so I didn't want to do anything that would get myself in trouble with Dad. When Mom and Dad were driving me back up to San Luis Obispo in the fall, you know, we had all my stuff in the car and they were taking me back up to school. So we stayed at the Quality Inn and Suites in downtown San Luis Obispo, and they were in the bedroom and I slept in the living room, and the bathroom was on the other side of the bedroom, so I had to go through the bedroom to get to the bathroom. And one morning, you know, had to go to the bathroom, and I walked into something that I didn't want to walk into ever, but it was pretty funny. You know, they were being intimate or done with their intimacy or whatever, and I quickly turned around and closed the door and walked out. But it was an eye-opener because I never visualized Mom and Dad to be like that, although I knew they had to have had intimate experiences because the four of us existed.
I remember in this house in Woodland Hills, Dad had just recently started his mask collection, and it was starting to grow. And us being rambunctious kids or boys, we would use the living room as our personal playground, which I'm sure many kids do. And we would pretend to play football, we would pretend to play baseball, and on this particular day, we were playing soccer with a Nerf soccer ball. And I remember one of us kicked the soccer ball and it went flying up against the wall and smashed into like hundreds of pieces one of these newly expanding masks of his expanding collection. I don't remember his exact reaction, but it didn't scar me for life, so I don't think it was, you know, too there was too much anger in it, but that was that's the first story I have to tell. Dad was a commercial artist, as many of us know, and was very dedicated to his work and his family. But I don't know if you remember or if it made a lasting impression with you or my other siblings, but the level of the degree of level of dedication or attention to detail when it came to our school projects, especially when we were in elementary school. By the time I went through the grades, Karen and Johanna had already passed through, and like I remember the teachers commenting, "Oh, I've got a Kingsley kid," or "I'm really curious as to what art project or what the mission is going to look like this year, or what the science project is going to look like this year." When I think California missions were in the 4th grade or something, and not just with my projects, but with Karen and Johanna's projects, Dad would spend countless hours, after work hours in evenings in the garage working on these blow everyone out of the water projects. And I remember when it was my turn to do the California missions, I had the Santa Barbara mission, and he built this amazing to scale model out of, foam core and cardboard and the terracotta roofing. He, used spaghetti, strips of spaghetti that he clipped and glued so it had this ruffled look, and spray painted it, the kind of rust red, and had like these little scale models for train, plants, and they would be like a conductor, a station master, and then he would put tape around them and paint them so they look like a Spanish monk who is manning the mission. These insane things that an elementary school kid would never, ever, be able to turn in and claim as their own project.
I'm Paul. I'm the 4th child of the Kingsleys. I'm the Kingsleys' 4th kid. Let's see. I am currently 36 years old. I saw him cry once. In '97, our grandma had passed away, and actually grandma wasn't just our grandma. Like, everybody called her grandma. Like, she was almost everyone's grandma. Like, even my friends who would come over to the house would call her, "Hey grandma," blah blah. And I think that was at the funeral, which it was someplace in Glendale. At the funeral was the only time I ever saw Dad cry, and I don't think he remembers it, because he actually doesn't really show much emotion. He doesn't really show much sad emotion, I guess. I don't know. But that would be, I think Joe was giving the eulogy. Well, Joe gave the eulogy because none of us, I don't know why Karen didn't do it, but Scott, first of all, Scott's way more emotional than any of us. And I knew I would lose it, So Joe was given the eulogy, and that is when I saw that Dad cry. I think it was during the eulogy. When Scott started crying hard at the funeral, that's when I saw Dad crying hard at the funeral. When we were growing up, I don't recall ever, Mom and Dad both worked, so I don't actually recall ever getting sit down and talk like, oh, okay, so when you get to be 13, 14, 15, you'll be going from, you know, this school, you'll be meeting new people at a high school and blah, blah, blah. I don't remember ever getting that. I do remember one time I was real young, and there used to be an ice cream shop called Weatherby's, or I can't remember the name of it. And the previous night, maybe I shouldn't talk about this, but I am one of the children in the world that had walked in on. I'll just leave it at that. And I don't think Mom and Dad ever. Maybe we shouldn't put that in the video. But anyway, that sticks out. And then I remember I made a comment to Mom at this ice cream place, and that's when I think like they had to break out the book, The Birds and the Bees, which I don't remember how old I was, but I remember thinking, oh, come on, really? You need to sit down and read this book? But I wasn't in high school or anything like that. I was young enough. I was at the age when, you know, walking into your parents' room, you know, was okay. I'm working at this other job, and it's kind of a dead-end job, but it, you know, whatever, it was full-time. And Dad had said, you know, are you ever going to take this trip to Australia you've been talking about? And I said, oh yeah, one day. And he was actually the one who talked me into it. He said, you know, you're always going to have bills, you're always going to have this, you're always going to have that, but you're not always going to have the opportunity to fly to Australia and go visit your friends and go backpacking or whatever. So the next day, like that night, I think I bought a plane ticket to go to Australia. And that was 2006. So I wouldn't have gone to Australia if Dad hadn't said, you know, you should go. Which is a good thing, because when I got back from Australia, that's when I was like, okay, get back into school, do this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And I did. Now I got my degree. So that's a good thing. And it all came from Dad saying, you know, no time like the present.
It's nice to have somebody, it's nice to have some friends still around, because so one of the prices you pay for living to be almost 80 is that so many people are gone, you know. But John seems to be in pretty good health, and we're hanging in there. And so, you know, it's fun to look back over all the things we've done since junior college. We still maintain friendships with at least one student from Glendale College that was our pal at the time. And you know, John and Inda are always good to try something new and go somewhere, you know, a restaurant or a movie or a little trip or something like that. So that's the nature of being good friends, I guess, is that you like to do things together.
Dad, I wish you a very, very happy birthday and many more to come. And I love you so much. And that's it. I wish I and Sarah and Charlie could be more available to you and you available to us, and be a bigger part of each other's lives. I love you.
Thank you for all the wonderful years, Dad. Happy birthday.
So, Dad, thank you very much for everything that you've done for us. You've raised me to be, I think, a very strong, independent woman, and I wish you the best. Happy birthday, and thank you. I love you.
Happy birthday, Dad. It's been 36 wonderful years. I appreciate everything that you and Mom have done for myself and, you know, the rest of the family, I guess. So happy birthday. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you enjoy your present, your gift. Happy birthday.
video is kind of the result of something that happened after my mother passed away. I began to realize how little I really knew of both my mother and father's background in detail. And I began to wish that I had recorded or taped some of her conversation with herself, and really interviewed her like Mark and Paul are doing with me. So I guess it's when that became known, that is the reason that they have decided to put this documentary together, and I'm grateful for that. They asked me to preceding this this effort. They asked me to make a rough outline of various events of my background, my history, which I did, and that has, of course, you can't get very detailed in these discussions, time being the problem and so forth. So this has led me to go on to fill in the blanks, so to speak, and expand on this outline and make it into a written memoir. My life has not been a very eventful or exciting one. I mean, just an average individual, not a movie star or a world famous or anything like that. I have nothing, but it seems as though everybody these days is writing and publishing a book. Not that I plan on doing that, but this is just something this is going to be just something to leave behind when I'm gone. So that's that. And I remember coming home drunk one night. I can still remember in the bunk grabbing the sides of the bunk, and it was like it was in a tossing sea. I was holding on for dear life. But that passed, and I was okay in the morning.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.